Today happens to be part 4 of the sutta we've been covering for the last 3 weeks. The discourse named Mahā Taṇhāsaṅkhaya Sutta, the greater discourse on the destruction of craving, tanha, the thirst, constant, unquenchable thirst that we have for more, for more, for more. And the more here is the root cause of birth and becoming, the root cause of suffering that we endure, we have to endure once we're born. So the Buddha was responding to the wrong and evil views that one particular bhikkhu had in his mind, in his heart, and was also teaching to others, misrepresenting the Buddha by teaching something that comes from the Brahmanic tradition, specifically about the Atman, or the soul, the concept of a soul that goes from place to place, from life to life, changing on clothing, basically, each life being one extra or one separate clothing that one wears. At the end of the life, they remove, and now there's another life. But the body doesn't change. To this day, we, as in human beings, we continue. You have large parts of humanity still believing in one form or another of a soul, an essential, substantial, unchanging self. And the Buddha just chastised him, rebuked at what he was saying, and told him, when did you see me teach this to anyone? And he kept quiet. He realized that he's caught. So then the Buddha takes that as an opportunity to go ahead and teach the other bhikkhus by questioning them. And that's what a good teacher does. Questions, and as often as necessary, the student doesn't dictate that need, the teacher, seeing the need, will pull the rug from underneath the student. Because it's not yet where the student has to be in their development, because they're standing on crooked ground. It's not their legs, it's not their roots. It's a delusion, it's a wrong view, it's a wrong belief. So to do that, the Buddha had to question, therefore, the students, to see, the other bhikkhus, to see if they also entertained such wrong views. And that's why he kept on asking again and again, how is it with you? Do you understand? This is after the Buddha explained again, step by step, the links of dependent origination or dependent arising, paticca samuppada, specifically how things come to be, how they unfold. And when the removal of one element that is a condition for something else to show up, when you remove that condition, the other thing naturally falls. It's the very ground, the foundation, the floor upon which the furniture will go. But if there's no ground, there's no floor, what will happen to the furniture? They won't have a place to stand. They won't have the place at all to be. Similarly, by removing of birth, there is no more suffering in a new life. There is no sickness in a new life. There is no old age in a new life. Why? Because the birth has been taken out of the equation. But how can you take out birth out of the equation? Well, you first have to remove the desire for rebecoming out of the equation, which is the requirement for birth to take place. And in order for us to remove the desire for rebecoming, which is bhava, then you need to be looking at what precedes it. What is the cause and the condition for that desire for rebecoming to be there in the first place? And that is upadana, the tenacious grabbing onto things. I want to re-experience things, that drive. Because once you have that, that means you have the rough material for you to go ahead and desire another birth. And once you have that desire for another birth, you will have another birth. And once you have that, then you will have pain, suffering, and everything else that comes along with it. So to go around asking, why me, oh Lord? Why me, oh God? Why me? Why me? Why am I suffering? Why am I losing loved ones? Why am I losing my needs? Why am I losing these opportunities? Or why am I sick? Why am I getting old? All these questions are stupid. Why? Because we're not asking the right question. Like I was telling another student the other day, a man came once to the Buddha complaining and in tears because they lost a loved one. And he kept asking, why do we have to suffer? Why do we have to suffer? To the Buddha. He wanted to have like some mystical response or something. Oh yes, so that we, God is testing us, or some other kind of a ridiculous teaching. But he didn't get that. He got something totally unexpected, but very practical. The Buddha asked him, old man, he was an older gentleman, were you born? And the man tries to shrug it off and, he's like, what do you mean? Were you born? He says, of course I'm born. I'm in the body and you're talking to me. I'm alive. So obviously I've been born. He says, okay. When you are born, these things come together with birth. They are chained together. They are linked up, connected at the hip, if you will, with birth. You have birth, you have suffering, you have old age, you have death, and you have everything else that comes along with it. Every single experience of loss, heartache, difficulties, asking questions as to why me type of a thing, that came because of birth, nothing else. The man is stunned. Basically, the Buddha rhetorically asked him, so where does the surprise part come in? When you have birth, you have these things. You have the death of your loved ones. To get rid of suffering, get rid of birth. People to this day don't even have the necessary fortitude to think about this clearly. Instead, we go ahead and want to extend life. Oh, eternal life. Oh, I don't want to die. Really? But I want to be, the birth has to be there. But let's forget about that. It's a given. So let's focus on reducing pain. In fact, I don't want to experience pain. I don't want to experience my liver not working anymore, my feet or my eyes not working anymore. I just want to live forever. That is the new ridiculous wrong view that is spreading like wildfire in the world today, especially those with means in the world. But the Buddha would have the same response to those idiots as well, because they're not asking the right questions. And sooner or later, they will die as well. Like everyone else tried to have an eternal life and died. Even devas die. So last week we reached the point where we stopped actually at the summary of the section on cessation. So today I'm going to try not to make several pauses, because my goal is to finish this section, well, this sutta today. So, but if and when you have a question, please make a note and we'll come back to it at the end. Okay, so let's start. So again, this is MN 38, Majjhima Nikaya number 38, Mahā Taṇhāsaṅkhaya Sutta. And the sutta is fully available as a PDF online at the website. In the Pali section, Pali Sutta section, at the website name again is Mind Released, past tense, mindrelease.com, mindrelease.com. So let's go. So here the Buddha asked questions, again, pertaining to the links of the paticca dependent arising, of which I just gave a few brief mention today. But and then the students responded in the correct way. And then we see what the Buddha says. Sadhu bhikkhus, you answered correctly, stating what I also have stated. That is, when this is no more, then that too does not exist. Because of the cessation and absence of this, then that also does not arise anymore and thereby ceases. In other words, when willful ignoring is no more, then the dynamic patterns or habitual drives, sankhara, also do not arise and thereby cease. So the Buddha is addressing the cessation. So he's gone back, if you will, to the beginning part, links, I guess, if you want to call them beginning, avidya. So it's because of willful ignoring that sankharas occur, the habitual drives, the dynamic patterns that we always get stuck in, whether in thought, in speech, or in physical action. Let's continue. And when the dynamic patterns or habitual drives do not exist, then consciousness also does not arise anymore and thereby ceases. And when there is no longer any consciousness, then name and form, nama rupa, also does not arise and thereby ceases. When name and form is no more, then the six sense spheres do not arise anymore and thereby cease. By the way, nama rupa, we don't use them as plural. They are one and the same. There's not a hyphen in between in the Pali. So name and form, I've discussed it many times. They constitute a person, but we don't see nama rupa, which are at the basis of the six sense spheres or the six consciousnesses, eye, ear, etc. They are used in the singular. Okay, name and form, or sometimes translated as materiality and mentality, or mentality and materiality. Anyhow, once the six sense spheres no longer occur, then contact also does not arise anymore and thereby ceases. And with the cessation of contact itself, then the very cause for feelings is removed. And thus, feelings also do not arise anymore and thereby cease. Then, because of the removal and elimination of feelings, craving, along with its constant thirst for more, also does not arise and thus ceases. And with the cessation of craving, with its constant thirst for more, the drive to want to grab or hold on also ceases and comes to an end. By the way, anyone who's going to be listening to this or is listening today for the first time, I've already mentioned the breakdown on several occasions, actually at least twice in the previous sections, part 2 and part 3 of the sutta, where I went in detail into each of these links. So now we're doing it backwards, but essentially they're the same links, except that it's the nirodha, the cessation aspect of them that the Buddha is addressing. That's why I'm not pausing. So if later anyone's listening to this recording, you know, and you want to know how this unfolds, please refer to the second and the third part of the sutta, which I've covered in the last 2 weeks prior. And with the once grabbing has ceased, then the desire for rebecoming is also eliminated and thereby ceases. And with the cessation of that desire to rebecome, then the very cause and condition for birth to take place is eliminated and thus is totally ceased. And when birth has ended, then, as a direct consequence of its cessation, illness, aging, and death are ended, along with the cessation of all sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and utter anguish that they would have brought along with them. So all that ceases. We want to go ahead and get rid of suffering. Well, you can eliminate causes for disease and sickness all around you in the world. You know, put some type of alarm systems, detection systems, but what you're doing is essentially you're locking yourself into a prison because, first of all, you're deluded because you want to control the outside circumstances. We cannot do that. We can't even control the inside circumstances inside the body. So the person has to be given the proper understanding of what is it that I want. And next, you go ahead. That's, by the way, a very crucial step. Most of us do not ask what it is that we want, to establish your intention. And then you go about looking for a clear teaching that helps to make that possible. So going about wanting eternal life or a life without suffering, that is the wrong question. You've heard me mention so many times that not every question deserves an answer, because many a times the question itself is wrongly placed. The premise is completely wrong. So how do you expect to get a proper answer to that? True answer to that, a good reply to that? Because the question is crooked. So the Buddha is completely turning the table on that stupidity and saying, no, you're going about it the wrong way. If you want to get rid of sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair, and anguish throughout one's life, then you need to look at the source, and that is the birth, being born. But being born itself doesn't come just in a vacuum. There's something prior to that, and that is the desire to be born. But where does that come from? It comes from the wanting to grab and hold on. Okay, here's where you need to look in the mirror and say, do I do that? For all intents and purposes, for as far as I know, I'm not dying at this moment. Okay. So let's look at the others. So I'm not being born necessarily, right? I'm here, still alive. Okay, do I have the desire to be again reborn? Really check in. Maybe that might be a little bit too fuzzy. Okay, let's take a step further back. Do I tenaciously grab onto experiences now in my life? Oh, yes. Okay, that is something that I can relate to, understand, visualize. It's very tangible. I can detect in my behavior. Okay, now I need to hone in and work on that to remove upadana. Once you do that, slowly, you will develop the fading away, the dispassion towards the desire to re-become. Do you see how it works? Otherwise, it's just a mystical, metaphysical thing, birth, this and that, and just it's left up to the gods or something like that. That's not Dhamma. That's not what the Buddha taught for 45 years. It is therefore in this manner whereby this whole mass of suffering is finished and comes to cease, no longer to occur ever again. Next section, knowing and seeing things for oneself. Now, bhikkhus, having reached the point where you personally know and see this for yourselves, would you then reach back to the past, to how you thought and functioned before, and start thinking or ruminating thus? Was I in the past, or was I not in the past? Who was I in the past? How was I in the past? Having been what? Who did I become in the past? And the students reply, no, Bhante. And having reached the point where you personally know and see this for yourselves, would you then run into the future? That was the past. So would you be nostalgic about the past? He asked with those. And now he's looking at the future. He's like, how about the future? Would you then run into the future, resuming your old line of thinking and how you functioned before, by now ruminating thus about the future? Will I exist in the future, or will I not exist in the future? What will I be in the future? How will I be in the future? And by having become what, who will I become in the future? No, Bhante. Nowhere in the history of religion, thinking, philosophy, psychology, do you ever come across such beautiful statements, beautiful teachings that pierce through delusion like a laser beam. We're always hovering. We're always on the pendulum. We're going from side to side, between the past and the future. Because it's easy. But that's the surest way that we do not live in the present. Because we're too busy being either in the past, nostalgic, or the future. In fact, most of the time, it's a combination of both. They perpetuate each other. It creates friction, and it keeps us feeling like we're doing something, that we're really living a substantively important, good life. And at least we're doing the right thing. Meanwhile, it's just, hocus pocus. In that case, knowing what you know now and see today for yourselves, would you then become perplexed or uncertain about the present, while carrying on your old ways of thinking and how you functioned before, while somehow staying confused about your current state, ruminating to yourselves in confusion with uncertainty? Am I existing now, or am I not? What am I? How is it that I am? And having arrived here from somewhere, this being called a me that is existing here, where is it now headed toward? This is a full-time job, to be doing this. Philosophers in the 20th century, they were thinking of themselves, wow, I must be really a genius to be thinking this. Who are we? Where are we coming from? Where are we going? Total, utter nonsense. Idiotic. This whole thing about Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Absolute rubbish. But interestingly enough, the whole entire Western civilization for the past at least 200 years has been worshiping that. Today, science functions, or at least quasi-science, I would say. Quantum science came in, quantum mechanics came in, quantum discoveries came in. That pretty much shoved René Descartes and his cogitum ergo sum, which is, I think, therefore I am, that statement that is like the sacrosanct statement in Western academia and scholasticism, went out the door. With quantum theory and quantum mechanics discovery of it, science or humanity finally started throwing the rope or build a bridge towards what the Buddha has been teaching. Because you don't ask these questions. There is no confusion when you understand dependent arising. That's why the Buddha spent so much of his time explaining causality, conditionality. Because you have this, then this will take place. There's no need for you to be surprised. If you have this, then you'll have this. So he asked the question, and the bhikkhu said, no, Bhante. In that case, bhikkhus, having now reached a point where you thus personally know and see things for yourselves, would you then somehow go on reflecting thus? Given our respect and veneration of the teacher, the Buddha, whenever we speak or however we respond to the teacher's questions and that he addresses to us, we make sure to speak words that stem from that same level of respect and veneration. So basically, the Buddha is asking, are you saying you understand this because, out of respect for me? Because you venerate me? By the way, countless are so-called followers who do that to this day. They've been doing it for thousands of years because it saves you the time and trouble to really think for yourself, to really come up with the answer. Instead, you just say, yeah, sure. Yeah, because we love the teacher. We appreciate the teacher. Yes, I don't want to plus be on the bad side of the teacher, be criticized and definitely not rebuked in front of the whole Sangha. So the Buddha is calling them out and saying, by the way, is it because of venerating me, your respect for me, that you're agreeing with me? Do you understand this? Do you understand? Do you get it? they say, is it because of the respect and veneration? And they say, no, Bhante. Bhikkhus, now that you reach the understanding as you personally know and see things for yourselves, would you then somehow go on reflecting thus? Because our recluse speaks in this manner, the recluse, capital R, in this case is Lord Buddha. He was the original recluse for the Sangha, stating and declaring these teachings, then we too must go on repeating him by saying what he says. No, Bhante. See? The bhikkhus are making a stance. They're saying, no, we understand, Bhante. Bhikkhus, now that you reach this understanding, as you now personally know and see things for yourselves, would you then somehow go to another teacher to follow and dedicate yourselves to them? No, Bhante. And this is the cleanest litmus test that I can think of, based on what the suttas say, not just this one, but thousands of others. It's impossible for somebody who sees and understands the Dhamma to go ahead and now choose another teacher. Plain and simple. It's impossible. But I see it all the time. People who claim to even be sotapannas, once, stream winners, once returners, sakadagami, anagami even, and they're all over the place. They're supermarket shopping. A little bit here, a little bit there. That defeats the whole, whatever they're claiming to be the case. And the answer is no. Would you then, bhikkhus, still go and engage in the various rites, noisy ceremonies, debates, and rituals conducted by all those recluses and Brahmins who consider such wasteful and empty activities as essential to living the holy life? No, Bhante. And that's why when a person attains Sotapatti, becomes a stream winner, the first awakened status out of the 8, or 4, then the thing that goes out the window, one of the 3 things that they drop, is the belief in rites and rituals, ceremonies, some type of a ritual, some type of a rite, some type of a, event that they go to, chanting this, that, and doing certain things that will ensure for them freedom, even reduction of suffering or elimination of suffering. You don't believe that anymore because it's not true. So you're seeing now, it's becoming like you now have the laser to pierce through ignorance. That's what the Buddha wanted for his students. That's why he's asking these questions and cross-questioning them. Is it out of respect for me that you're saying, yeah, Bhante, yeah? Or do you really get it? And they say, yes, Bhante, we get it. It's not out of respect for you. Even though we have veneration, we respect you completely, but it's not because of that we're saying yes. We get it. Because they see. So this is very important, the term, the verb that we have in Pali, which is repeated again and again, pajanati, understands, knows. Sanjanati, also, there's a deeper understanding there. You see, you understand. For yourself, because the Buddha is not going to be there forever. The teacher is not going to be holding your hand forever. When you're in the midst of the gunk of life, dealing with situations on your own, that's where your understanding has to kick in. Or are you just repeating patterns from yesterday that are so familiar to you? Or the hopes and things that you already had in the past about the future, you're still repeating them? Or are you still confused about the present? Am I practicing? Am I not? Is this understanding correct? And then just leave it at that. If you are in limbo in any of these, then where does understanding come? Where is your understanding? Is it even there? That's a legitimate question. And that's why the Buddha keeps asking them that. In that case, bhikkhus, would it not mean that you are now speaking from the very premise of having personally known and seen for yourselves? Yes, indeed, Bhante. So they are now, this is in a way a mini lion's roar. You know, we don't know if they were awakened, if they were attained any of those 4 stages. But to me, it sounds like that. And the Buddha says, Sadhu bhikkhus, after all, I have been guiding you all by teaching and instructing you this Dhamma that is directly visible here and now, being immediately effective, inviting one to come and investigate and see for oneself, leading and taking one straight forward, undeterred, and as such, it is to be understood and personally realized by the wise, each for oneself. You are the only person responsible for your happiness. You, not anyone else. You are therefore responsible for removing and pulling yourself out of suffering. No one else. Just like you are responsible for living your own life, not anyone else. Not all those people, beings that you keep saying to yourself, I'm sacrificing my present for them. Not your job, not your career, not your loved ones. Nothing ultimately is responsible for you to cut yourself free from suffering and future rebirths other than yourself. Most people don't want to hear that, because it's easier to go ahead and dedicate your life to others, whether it's a job, whether it's a career, whether it's the environment, whether it's some cause. Ultimately, all that, you have to check to see the situation back home. How am I doing here? And when your life is in shambles, you've wasted your life. As far as the Dhamma, as far as the Buddha is concerned, you have wasted your life. Why? Because you don't know happiness. Your happiness relies on others. Your happiness relies on you achieving certain things in the external world or seeing things in the external world to happen first. And that's why you go ahead and deludedly tell yourself, oh, now I have less suffering. In the words of Ebenezer Scrooge, bah humbug. It's nonsense. Therefore, this is precisely why it is declared to you all. The Dhamma is indeed well expounded. It is directly visible here and now, immediately effective, inviting one to come and investigate for oneself, taking one straight forward, undeterred, to be understood and personally realized by the wise, each for oneself. Remember, wisdom or being wise is not a title you are given by a teacher or by some committee. You will know it by the simple fact that you are not stepping into the same pile of dog poop. I'm using it as a metaphor, of course. If you don't repeat your past hang-ups, you don't find yourself in the same ditches, then it means you're walking away from stupidity and you're going towards wisdom. Why? But that doesn't happen haphazardly. That happens because you intended to go in the right direction. You took on the responsibility of living your life courageously. Most people are not. You can study the Dhamma forever. That does not even add 1 ounce of courage into your life, unless you start bringing it into your life and start doing something with it to make it really bear fruit. The Dhamma itself is not going to bear fruit just because of osmosis. It won't happen. It requires effort and a deliberate intention to make it part and parcel of your life by enacting, by bringing the teachings into your every nook and cranny in your life and watering it and cultivating your life according to those standards. That's why I say, you, not just me, this Dhamma says, make sure you have sīla. That's the first indication that the person is doing the right training. Make sure you practice meditation, purifying the mind. Make sure that you leave behind your old tendencies, your old ways of thinking, instead of worshiping and building an altar and repeating what was yesterday, what you extracted to the good moments of a yesterday, maybe, or hopes for a future. The Dhamma has nothing to do with those two. The process of becoming from conception to adulthood. That's the next section, which is the 12th section. Bhikkhus, there are 3 situations in which the descent into an embryo takes place. These are: here, despite there being a mother and a father, neither the mother happens to be in season, nor the necessary momentum of the stream of consciousness is present. As a result, the descent into an embryo does not take place, and a being is not conceived. The elements, they're not fully you can call it the ingredients to a recipe are missing 1 or 2. They're not there. Because in this case, even though there's a mom and a dad, but the mother is not prepared, her body is not ready. Nor is there a sufficient amount of momentum of a stream of consciousness. In this case, the Pali word for it is gandhabba. This is not a separate class of beings which we see in the heavenly realm of the 4 great kings, but this is a term, and something that to bear in mind is many terms in Pali, they don't just mean one thing. Okay? You have to think of them very contextually. I've said this many times before, but they are in many ways open-ended, depending on the situation, what it's referring to. So if you approach it in a typical, analytical, academic, very squarish way, and look at this, Gandhabba means, what is that? Because I've seen people actually trying to fit these two, because they don't want to relinquish the idea that Gandhabba could be something, or they don't want to adopt the idea that the Gandhabba could be something else. In this case, it's the stream of consciousness which is impelled by the desire for re-becoming. Remember that. That's why it's so powerful. But despite that, it might not be sufficiently strong enough to really latch on. Even when you have a mother who is in season and she is able to produce an egg, then you have the sperm of the father. Still, it will end up being blank in a sense. No embryo will show up because the stream of consciousness was weak, not strong enough. In this case, the Buddha says, not present. So that's the first. Next, despite there being a mother and a father, while the mother happens to be in season, so you have the mother, you have the egg of the mother, that's what the Buddha is saying. The momentum of the stream of consciousness, Gandhabba, however, is not present. So now, one more element is there, but the stream of consciousness is not there. It's not. And that happens at the moment of death, by the way. That's why it's so crucial for us to not be, if the person is wise enough to not to want to be born, they need to make sure they don't have the desire to be reborn. That's like a rocket into a new life. But in this case, they're still not there, even though there's a sperm and an egg. As a result, the descent into an embryo does not take place, and thereby a being is not conceived. Lastly, there is this situation wherein a mother and a father are present, as the mother happens to be in season, and the momentum of the stream of consciousness is present as well. As a result, the descent into an embryo does take place, and thereby a being is then conceived. Makes sense. So now all the elements were there. Now, still that's not the end of the story, because in other suttas we've seen where Lord Buddha was answering Ananda's questions, because there miscarriages, for example, even though the embryo is there. Embryo means it's a zygote and it's already fertilized egg. So there's the potential for that being to form. Okay, we're calling it a being, or a cell that's growing and becoming a fetus more and more. But the karmic residue is very important here, because you need to have the other supplemental areas being filled for that being. Otherwise, it will break away from the uterine wall. It will not develop any further. And you hear this quite often with women who want to conceive and who've lost the child, and it really is devastating. So, because it builds a connection, because now you're no longer one person, you're divided. So there the woman feels there's another being. So there's a beautiful connection that happens between them. But then all of a sudden it's gone, despite the fact that the embryo is not fully developed. So there's other forces at play, given the sufficient amount or insufficient amount of the karma of the person, meaning the good deeds that being, the stream of consciousness of whom landed in the embryo, made the embryo with a sperm and an egg. So there's many factors, because the child might be born or might not be born, might be going through a miscarriage, or they might be born but with some deficiencies in body. All these are part of the karma at this stage, from the moment that the descent into the embryo takes place. Now, let's look at it from the other aspect of what the Buddha is saying in this sutta. From that moment on, and for 9 or 10 months, 10 because in India they would use lunar months, which is less days, which make up an extra month. Otherwise, it's 9 months if you take into consideration Gregorian calendars. The mother goes on carrying the embryo in her womb while experiencing many difficulties as she faces the anxiety in bearing her heavy burden. Later, when those 9 or 10 months are completed, the mother gives birth to her child, facing many dangers, as she again must undergo more anxiety while delivering her heavy burden. Then, once the child is born, the mother looks after the infant while nourishing the baby with her own blood, because within the Noble One's discipline, the mother's breast milk is considered and seen as her very blood, which she gives to her newborn. Afterwards, as her baby continues to grow up, where his faculties improve, the young boy then starts playing games, such as amusing himself with playing with toy plows, stick throwing, doing the somersaults, running with or playing with a toy windmill, toy measures, playing with toy carts, or small toy bows. Then, as he grows up with his faculties continuing to mature further, the young man now prefers to amuse himself while enjoying the various pleasurable experiences that he finds through his 5 chords of sensuality. Thus, he craves seeing pleasurable visible forms and objects that he witnesses with his eyes, sights that are longed for and desired, which are likable and enjoyable, being connected to sensual lust, arousing and provoking passions in him. Similarly, he craves listening to and hearing pleasurable sounds that he hears with his ears, sounds that are longed for and desired, which are agreeable to him and enjoyable, being connected to sensual lust, arousing and provoking passions in him. Similarly, he craves smelling pleasurable odors and fragrances which he senses through his nose, smells that are longed for and desired, which are agreeable to him and enjoyable, being connected to sensual lust, arousing and provoking passions in him. Similarly, he craves tasting pleasurable flavors which he tastes with his tongue, flavors that are longed for and desired, which are agreeable to him and enjoyable, being connected to sensual lust, arousing and provoking passions in him. Similarly, he craves touching pleasurable textures, which he senses through his body and skin, touches that are longed for and desired, which are agreeable to him and enjoyable, being connected to sensual lust, arousing and provoking passions in him. So he pretty much gave a, so now the young boy is grown up and maybe is a young man. Section 13, continuing to become. Thus, on seeing a visible form with the eyes, if it happens to be a delightful and pleasurable sight, then he goes on lusting after it. But if it happens to be a disagreeable or unpleasant sight, then he abhors and dislikes it. In this manner, he lives his life unaware, dwelling while disassociated from the body, without any sense of mindfulness being established in it, and with a heart that is constricted and in a constant state of confusion and loss. Basically, he just described the life of a puthujjana. If you get shaken up by things that are agreeable, enjoyable, pleasurable, if you get shaken up by things that are opposite, in the opposite direction, you hate it, you feel repugnance, and you just then you're still in the same boat. Because in both cases, you're no longer connected with what's happening to the body. That's why the Buddha teaches us the first step of satipatthana, foundation, the base of mindfulness practice, is the body. That's why we did today the breath meditation as a conduit for metta. You always have to start with the body. I don't care what technique you're using. We don't start from, ether or something. We start with the body, something that is, we know we inhabit it after all. But when we encounter pleasurable experiences or unpleasant experiences, something happens. We dissociate. We cut ourselves off from reality. So this is happening to that fetus that is now a man or a young man. Furthermore, he still does not understand how the heart's release takes place and the way in which freedom is attained through wisdom, wherein those harmful and evil states get eliminated by ceasing without any remainder. So he has no clue. This person, he or she, does not have any clue about the possibility that he could cut himself loose from this back and forth, torturous, hamster wheel. That is not supposed to be one's life, but we've been told that it is. Who do you think you are wanting to break free from that? That's what they said even to to Siddhartha, to the future Buddha, when they said, who do you think you are wanting to end samsara? No one's ever been able to do it. It's our lot. This is it. God wanted us to be coming and going and coming and going in samsara, rebirth cycles forever. And the Buddha shook his head and said, no. Your conclusions are wrong, and I'm going to go ahead and prove it. And he did. Lost in constant engagement thus, he goes on seesawing between preferring and rejecting, liking and disliking, as he chooses between the various feelings he experiences, be they pleasant, painful, or neutral, favoring those that give him delight, which he leans into and welcomes, and thus continues tenaciously grabbing onto. And that's the dance that we are stuck in. That's the limbo. That's the state of back and forth, seesawing. And that keeps us agitated. That keeps us busy, in fact. And every time we do get a chance to land in a pleasurable state of mind, or we get what we want temporarily, we think, this is bliss. We made it. Meanwhile, you're fooling yourself because you're just on the other side of the pendulum. And soon enough, because it's conditioned, soon enough, you're going to taste the opposite extreme. Painful. And now you're going to say, why me? Why me? This always happens to me. You're stuck. That's the life of a puthujjana. The uninstructed, unlearned, unwise, dense, stubborn person who wants to stay in the trash, in the mud, in the cesspit of ignorance. It takes effort, to climb out of a cesspit. The poop is not going to push you up. You have to pull yourself out and up from that. So the person has to spend the time to look at their own justifications, their own reasonings to be experiencing this trauma. Because it's traumatic, going from pleasurable to pain, pain to pleasure, always wanting to have the pleasure. And we mistakenly call that seeking happiness. There's only one path that has sought happiness, and that is the path of Dhamma. Because every other thing, every other system of thought, they've thought about their whole premise is maximization of pleasure. That's what they call a happy life. And minimization of painful experiences. But that's not happiness at all, the Buddha says. Because you're doing it through the medium of pleasure. That's your goal. And in many cases, people think of Nibbana as a pleasurable realm of, getting more pleasure. Getting your hearts filled with pleasures. That it's not. It's the opposite. Not in the way that it's painful. No, it's free from both pain and pleasure. It is therefore in the presence of that tenacious drive to grab and hold on that the desire to re-become manifests and comes to be. And once that desire for re-becoming is present, then birth takes place, as a result of which illness, aging, and death become inevitable realities for him to face, followed by much sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and utter anguish. It is therefore in this manner whereby this whole mass of suffering comes to be and manifests as it keeps piling up one after another. Remember, in the beginning, when the Buddha was delineating the links of dependent arising, he didn't give us many examples. I mean, we didn't flesh it out into a form of a person and undergoing. Here we have the Buddha is holding our hand, is showing us step by step from the moment of conception as to how the person develops and goes into life, experiences life, and has to deal with now suffering, lamentation, pain, grief, anguish, loss. All. So we now have representations, examples of the links of the Paticcasamuppada in the form of this person, the model that he's using for us to flesh out Paticcasamuppada for us too, so that you can understand that. Further, on hearing a sound with the ears, if it happens to be a delightful and pleasurable sound, then he goes on lusting after it. But if it happens to be a disagreeable or unpleasant sound, then he abhors and dislikes it. In this manner, he lives his life unaware, dwelling while dissociated from the body, without any sense of mindfulness being established in it, and with a heart that is constricted and in a constant state of confusion and loss. The pleasure we seek will not get the heart to be unconstricted. Please take that in. Try to understand what that is saying. When you are in a state of confusion and loss, you are far from the Dhamma. You're not understanding the Dhamma. You're not understanding what the Buddha is trying to say. That's one of the reasons for us to practice. So it's not in stages in a sense. Sīla, you have to practice, or even before that, dana, to drop all the heavy bags of stinginess and miserliness from your heart and mind, despite all the reasonings you come up with or excuses not to be so. After you have the generosity playing openly in you, in your heart, without any questions, no obstacles in your mind at all, sīla, you maintaining restraint over your senses, making sure you're abstaining from anything that causes harm to you or to others, in any way, fashion, or form. Purifying the mind through meditation, through mindfulness, through awareness, full awareness, sati sampajanya. To support all that, you need the teachings to come in and to give you a justification for you to behave like this. You need to remind yourself of incidents, of situations, of stories you have learned and you've been exposed to thus far in the Dhamma. You see, they are very permeable. They go into each other. They are not separate compartments as such. Even though we say the different trainings, but they are part and parcel of each other. Growth happens through them together, not just one. That's why a person who only practices sīla is not going to go far. A person who only does good deeds or only does generous acts, most of the world leaders you have, most of the wealthy, powerful, elites, ultra elites in society, they have done some wonderful good deeds in the past. Incredible good deeds and generous acts they've done. That's why they're in that state now. The powerful people who are ruining the planet now have done some amazing generous acts. They've done some amazing good deeds for others. It's just that they didn't do as much, or their hearts were not pure enough to get them to be reborn in the heavenly realm. So they get the next best thing, which is rebirth into a human realm with resources that are incredibly unimaginable for the rest of us. But how are they functioning? With absolute immorality, often. Without hearts, one would even say. They behave as if they're not even human. So the behavior change has not taken place simply because you've done something good. So it has to go all the way. The mental purification has to be there, but it has to be supported by the proper teachings. Otherwise, you're just doing good for future, outcome. And we see the evidence of that around us, where the person is not a noble person at all. So that's why I tell people, don't just go crazy over doing good deeds and that's it. Means nothing. Ultimately, if that's what you're doing and that's it. Also, he still does not understand how the heart's release takes place and the way in which freedom is attained through wisdom, wherein those harmful and evil states get eliminated by ceasing without any remainder. It's not for the rest of the day, it's forever. Once you understand wisely, you won't go ahead and do the stupid things you used to do. And that's how a teacher knows if you are truly developing or not. It's just, maybe you're just doing it out of respect or veneration, but essentially you're the same person as you were back then. Lost in constant engagement, thus, he goes on seesawing between preferring and rejecting, liking and disliking as he chooses between the various feelings he experiences, be they pleasant, painful, or neutral, favoring those that give him delight, which he leans into and welcomes, and thus continues tenaciously grabbing onto. All this keeps him animated as he looks for ways to give rise to more delightful experiences to occur in him. But that very quest to enjoy more and have more delightful feelings and experiences is none other than the drive to want to grab and hold on. The person is very selective, obviously. They're preferring to experience the good experiences, but not the bad one. Okay, tell me, how is that so different from just a regular person on the street who's lost in their passions? Who I mentioned, the ultra elites who are ruining this planet for us and everyone else. How is it different than what they're doing? They're just using their resources to their advantage. Isn't that what you're doing then? If this is the premise, this is how you function. It is therefore in the presence of that tenacious drive to grab and hold on that the desire to re-become manifests and comes to be. And once that desire for re-becoming is present, then birth takes place, as a result of which illness, aging, and death become inevitable realities for him to face, followed by much sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and utter anguish. It is therefore in this manner whereby this whole mass of suffering comes to be and manifests, as it keeps piling up one after another. So, because we're going through the senses or consciousnesses, what I'm going to do is, because we've done the eye and the ear, so I'm just going to read the first sections of the next ones: the nose, the body, the tongue, the body, and then read the rest in one section. So, furthermore, but you please go ahead and do it at your own pace. Underline, print it out, the PDF, and read at least the whole thing. That's why it's there. Furthermore, on smelling a fragrance or odor with the nose, if it happens to be a delightful and pleasurable smell, then he goes on lusting after it. Now I'm going to go to the tongue. Furthermore, on tasting a flavor with the tongue, if it happens to be a delightful and pleasurable taste, then he goes on lusting after it. Furthermore, on touching a tactile object with the body, if it happens to be a delightful and pleasurable touch, then he goes on lusting after it. Furthermore, on cognizing a mind object with the mind, if it happens to be a delightful and pleasurable thought or mind object, then he goes on lusting after it. But if it happens to be a disagreeable or an unpleasant thought or mind object, then he abhors and dislikes it, hates it, basically. In this manner, he lives his life unaware, dwelling while dissociated from the body, without any sense of mindfulness being established in it, and with a heart that is constricted and in a constant state of confusion and loss. Also, he still does not understand how the heart's release takes place, and the way in which freedom is attained through wisdom, wherein those harmful and evil states get eliminated by ceasing, without any remainder. Lost in constant engagement, thus, he goes on seesawing between preferring and rejecting, liking and disliking, as he chooses between the various feelings he experiences, be they pleasant, painful, or neutral, favoring those that give him delight, which he leans into and welcomes, and thus continues tenaciously grabbing onto. These are the sources for a new birth. Okay? All this keeps him animated as he looks for ways to give rise to more delightful experiences to occur in him. But that very quest to enjoy more and have more delightful feelings and experiences is none other than the drive to want to grab and hold on. It is therefore in the presence of that tenacious drive to grab and hold on, upadana we call it, that the desire to rebecome manifests and comes to be. And once that desire for rebecoming is present, then birth takes place, as a result of which illness, aging, and death become inevitable realities for him to face, followed by much sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and utter anguish. It is therefore in this manner whereby this whole mass of suffering comes to be and manifests, as it keeps piling up one after another. Now we get to section 14, ending the cycle, the progressive training, or ending to the cycle. I think it's better if it says ending the cycle, the progressive training. Here, bhikkhus, the very rare event takes place as the Tathagata arises in the world, the Arahant, perfectly self-awakened, endowed with true knowledge and conduct, the fortunate one, the knower of worlds, the incomparable and matchless tamer of all those ready and seeking to be tamed and disciplined, the teacher of both gods and humans, the awakened and truly blessed. He declares the Dhamma, having himself personally realized it and directly known, which he then teaches and explains to beings throughout existence, together with its devas, humans, maras, brahma, and the community of recluses and brahmins. He thus instructs by sharing the Dhamma that is lovely in its beginning, lovely in its middle, and lovely in its end, teaching it with its full meaning, being perfectly balanced in its expression and phrasing, while declaring and revealing the completeness and purity of the holy life. Then, a householder or the son of a householder born into a certain family, on hearing that same Dhamma, sooner or later comes to gain faith and strong confidence in it and in the Tathagata. Then he reflects to himself, household life is troublesome and problematic, being tinged with and full of impurities, whereas going forth into homelessness is wide open with many possibilities indeed. It really is not easy to lead the holy life to its fullness that is so complete and pure, while still living the household life. So what if I shave my head and beard, and put on the monastic robes and just go forth? So, in due course, he gives up a small or large amount of wealth, also giving up a small or large circle of friends and relatives as he shaves his head and beard, puts on the monastic robes, and goes forth into homelessness. Having gone forth thus, he trains himself in the monastic rules, while abandoning the destruction of living beings, as he gives up the impulse to harm, throwing away his weapons and becoming selflessly caring and considerate with aroused compassion, abiding thus with universal compassion in his heart for all living beings. By giving up taking what is not freely given, he only accepts what is given to him. By giving up the common and unholy life, he leads the truly chaste holy life while abstaining from the vulgar practice of sexual intercourse and anything to do with it. By giving up the speaking of falsehood and telling lies, he speaks only what is truth and becomes trustworthy in the world. By giving up slandering, he does not go and tell over there what he has heard here, in order to create schism between people. Similarly, he does not tell here what he had heard over there, in order to create schism between people over there. Thus, he speaks in order to join the disjointed, while strengthening the wholesome and harmonious bonds between people. Fond of unity, he talks words that lead to unity and harmony. By giving up destructive and mean words, he speaks politely and with a pleasant, sweet voice, with words that go straight to the heart, and his words are accepted by the masses. By giving up frivolous speech and idle chatter, he speaks at the right time, speaking only what is truth and meaningful, speaking only what is the Dhamma and the discipline, and at the right time, while using the most appropriate words and succinctly, using such words that are worth being recorded and repeated, given their beneficial nature. He refrains from destroying seeds, fruit trees, and vegetable plants, while refraining from taking food at the inappropriate times or at night. He only takes one meal a day. He refrains from dancing, singing, playing music, and engaging in musical entertainment. He refrains from decorating himself with flowers, scents, or fragrant ointments. He gives up high and stately beds. He refrains from accepting gold, silver, and money. He does not accept raw grains, raw flesh, women, girls, slaves, whether women or men, goats and sheep, roosters and pigs, elephants, cattle, horses, and mares. He does not accept fields or lands. He abstains from being a go-between or from carrying messages between people, from buying and selling, or dealing in matters unfairly, such as deceitfully fiddling with measures and weights. He does not take bribes, nor cheats, nor engages in any insincere or cunning action. He does not cut, kill, or bind, and he does not collect or consume even a single morsel of food violently, in voracious or barbaric ways. Being fully contented and satisfied with the robes to protect and cover the body, along with the morsels of food for the stomach, wherever he goes with all that he needs, like a bird that flies freely with only the feathers on its back. In the same way, the bhikkhu is utterly contented and satisfied with the robes to protect and cover the body, along with the morsels of food for the stomach, and wherever he goes with all that he needs. By possessing these virtues of the noble ones, the bhikkhu experiences the internal happiness that is truly blameless. Remember, the bhikkhus knew this, but as a teacher, he is repeating it for the bhikkhus and every one of us to hear, to listen to. because it's very easy to forget, especially for bhikkhus, as to why we become ordained, why we go forth in the first place. Sati is still there, that monk that instigated this whole sutta. It was the cause for this sutta to be taught by the Buddha. But who knows, there might have been also other monks. And it's very tempting when you have resources coming in, especially in those days, where many of them were, beggars on the street or from the lowest rungs of society. Suddenly they're getting all this attention, all this support. Kings are rising up from their seats, giving them an honorable position, in the court, just to sit and offering them food. So it's very, very tempting. So the Buddha is reminding them why we go forth. On seeing a form with the eye, he does not allow himself to be taken by or absorbed into its features and details. For he knows quite well that if he were to abide with an otherwise uncontrolled eye faculty, damaging and harmful states would start to leak in, and as a result, he would certainly fall victim to longing, covetousness, and dejection too, that would come to dominate his thoughts and overwhelm his art. To this end, he carefully guards and practices restraint of the eye faculty. When you become a bhikkhu or a nun, you don't lose your eyesight. Your ears function. Your skin still feels. Your taste buds still work. Your nose still works. Your mind definitely still is working. The robes will not protect you from what you do with these senses. That's what the Buddha is saying. So if you were attracted to a very attractive, provocative image, a scene, a person from the opposite sex, before you were ordained, and after you were ordained as a monk, your eyes are doing the same thing. Your mind is doing the same thing, treating that information the same way as you did when you were a layperson. There's a problem, a big problem. And that's what the Buddha is reminding the bhikkhus. See, many a time scholars who, unfortunately, when they translate, coming from that angle, from that position, like an armchair philosopher type of a thing, oftentimes will misread the suttas because they will completely miss the boat, miss the whole, forest for the trees, because they will not take into consideration the human element, the contextual background story. What do I mean by, or what am I referring to rather? You will have in the same discourse teachings by the Buddha that for an observer, superficial observer, they will say, what has that got to do with what the Buddha was saying earlier, like paticca samuppada, dependent right? Why is he talking about that? No, they're very much connected. The Buddha is talking to people, and the paticca samuppada is about life. The dependent arising links we've covered the last 3 weeks, today too, have everything to do with the way your relationship works with your 6 sense spaces, your 6 sense spheres, your eyes, your relationship with the eyes, the ears, what you do with the data. Is there restraint? If there is restraint, then there is far less chance for you to go ahead and grab on tenaciously. Therefore, to want to desire to re-become, because there's no guilt, there's no sorrow, there's no suffering, there's no longing, because you're simply seeing the eye. Oh, the eye. I was looking there and I saw this. Okay, that's it. There was a seeing. End of story. The mind might come in and say, oh, yeah, but did you see that? Did you see? Oh, that was so. No. Now you're looking at the mind saying, what's going on there? Deflates like a balloon left in a very hot room or gets popped with a needle. If you know what you're doing, if you know and understand why. The eye is an object. That's it. So what? Your attention was there and you saw this, and then there was an object, visible object. Okay, there was a seeing, eye consciousness. Okay, so you look carefully at the feeling that arises. Does this generate enjoyable, pleasurable feeling? Aha! That's where the spotlight has to be. Forget about the object. Who cares? They're gone. They belong to someone else, maybe. Well, most probably. But your eyes have done their job. Now it's your job to practice restraint over the mind and turn that into an opportunity for learning the Dhamma. That's why the six sense doors are not necessarily our enemies, period. No, they can help teach us the Dhamma if we know what and how to use them. Similar, this way, I'm actually going to jump through these as well. I'm just going to read the first, but please, you go over them one at a time fully. Similarly, on hearing a sound, on smelling an odor, on tasting a flavor, on touching a tactile object, similarly, on knowing a thought, the bhikkhu does not allow himself to be taken by or absorbed into its features and details. For he knows quite well that if he were to abide with an otherwise uncontrolled mind faculty, damaging and harmful states would start to leak in, and as a result, he would certainly fall victim to longing, covetousness, and dejection too. That would come to dominate his thoughts and overwhelm his heart. To this end, he carefully guards and practices restraint of the mind faculty. And by possessing complete restraint over his mental faculties, thus, such a bhikkhu will not become perturbed when touched by a displeasing or negative experience or sensation. Whether in approaching or going away, in looking forward, backward, or and about, he remains mindful, clearly comprehending and fully aware of his entire experience. Also, whenever flexing or stretching out his limbs, or in wearing his outer robes or taking his alms bowl with him, he remains mindful, clearly comprehending the entire experience. Nothing escapes your attention. Now, you're not becoming like, as they say, obsessive compulsive. No. There is no tension in the brain, in the mind. As you're observing, you're simply observing like a mirror. You're simply seeing, that's it. That's practicing sati. Every moment is a jewel. You don't want to miss out what it can teach you. You will discover wonderful things about walking, about turning your head. The Buddha was known as having the elephant's posture, elephant's turn. What that means is basically, whenever he gazed at someone, he would turn his whole entire body. Not just his head, just turning the neck. It was quite astonishing for people to see that. So somebody would come and say something, and the Buddha would completely, with the whole body turn. That necessitates the presence of 100% sati. 100%. He's fully there. Next time, try to see if you can bring that. I'm not asking you for you to have the elephant turn, okay? Society will not go easy on you. Just when you're turning your head, see if your connection is not with the object over there trying to grab your attention, but with your intention to move the neck, to observe and see. Meanwhile, you're panning or you're turning your eyes, and it's basically painting the walls and everything that the eyes grab with some attention. And then finally, the thing that you're looking at, boom, it's right there. The way you move your hand, the way you reach to grab your fork or knife or spoon when you're eating. Bring sati there. It's not like somebody's going to give you, you're giving a report card for a teacher to somebody to give you a grade on it. No. The grading, if there is such a thing, comes from you experiencing the genuineness of that beautiful moment. Most of us do not taste the present moment, do not know what it feels like to be alive. Sati will give you the keys, the access code to that, whenever we use them. And similarly, when eating his meal, drinking and tasting, he always remains mindful. moving and behaving with full awareness, clearly comprehending the entire experience. Similarly, when urinating and defecating, he remains mindful, moving mindfully and behaving with full awareness, clearly comprehending the entire experience, whether he is walking, standing, sitting, or lying down to rest, or in waking up, while speaking, or when being silent. Full mindfulness is present in him. Being thus endowed with this virtuous behavior of the noble ones, along with the complete restraint over his mental faculties, fully present and aware, with mindfulness and clear comprehension distinctive of the noble ones, he looks for and then dwells in a secluded dwelling, such as a forest, the root of a tree, a mountain grotto, a cemetery, a forest or a jungle, an open space, or even a heap of straw. Then, once he has taken his meal, having found himself a quiet area to practice in the forest, or by the visible roots of trees, or in an empty hut, he folds his legs by gathering them into a comfortable position. And while keeping the body upright and soft, he establishes mindfulness in front of him by starting to become aware of the air flowing in and around his mouth and nostrils. Thus, he trains and lives by actively dropping from his heart yearnings of all kind, along with greed, as he purifies it from the stains of coveting. He trains and lives by actively dropping ill will and anger from his heart, as he purifies it from the stains of hatred. He trains and lives by actively dropping delusion from his heart, as he purifies it from the stains of delusion. By remaining mindful and fully aware of his experience, he lives by actively pushing through both drowsiness and procrastination, while bringing to mind and dwelling in the perception of light, constantly cleansing his heart and mind from any traces of drowsiness and procrastination. By the way, in other suttas, the Buddha mentions this as a very powerful tool to wake you up. Sometimes in retreats or long retreats, that's, people, when they reach the point where they can't keep, awake, I would tell them, okay, go ahead and splash your eyes with cold water. But especially when you're sitting, sometimes the drowsiness can come in. Imagining the light of the sun brightening up the whole mind, your room, is enough for you to just go like this. So the suttas say how you see it as though it is daytime, and you bring the light of the sun into the night as if it was day. Seeing it at night, seeing it daytime, you could stay awake for many, many hours, many, many days. That's the power of the sun. That's the power of the light to dissipate the darkness of, sloth and sleepiness and drowsiness. Furthermore, he calmly stabilizes the agitated heart while carefully moving beyond both restlessness and worry, as he calmly abides with a mind that remains internally appeased and contented, calmly dwelling in the present, right here and now, without stirring any agitation. Finally, by actively having crossed over and removed all doubts, he dwells by having put an end to perplexity or confusion, on distinguishing between the good and beneficial behaviors that should be developed and those damaging and harmful behaviors that should be abandoned. So there's no more confusion in the mind of such a practitioner as to what is right, what is kusala, what is wholesome, from what is akusala, what is unwholesome. They know in their heart. Because once you have sati, you also now are becoming more and more intuitive. You no longer are going to be able to convince you with your mental jargon and your lies. Your deceptions won't be able to hold water. You won't be able to pull it off, those deceptive stories you keep telling yourself. Because your heart never lies and says it, but you have to be aware, you have to be present, and you have to have Dhamma, understanding, to chip away what is adhamma from what is Dhamma. And most of whatever is in the heart is adhamma. That's what we call them kilesas, or defilements, defiling agents, because they've gathered, because of our inattention, willfully ignoring what is right from what is wrong. to the point where we become our own, against us, ourselves, spies, agents against us, assassins against ourselves, against what the heart wants, to remain putujanas, to not wake up. The Dhamma, if it is really being pursued by you, will tear all that apart. That's why you will never see an awakened person who is sad and upset and deluded. By overcoming these obstructive 5 hindrances while being secluded from running after things having to do with sensuality, the bhikkhu pulls his attention inwards and becomes quite secluded from sensual pleasures. Being thus secluded from unwholesome and bad merit-making states, he enters upon and remains in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thinking and planning or pondering, while experiencing a strong flood of spiritual joy and ecstasy, all resulting from such seclusion. It's like being draped by, on all sides, every pore of your skin covered up with this goose flesh, joy manifesting upon the body. And the heart feels like it's going to explode from joy. And that's basically the first jhana. Then, by stilling his thinking process without fighting with himself, the bhikkhu turns his attention away from his thoughts by not engaging with them any further, and comes to experience the disappearance of both thinking and planning. In this way, he enters upon and remains in the second jhana, which continues to be accompanied by a strong flood of spiritual joy and ecstasy that are now the result of his growing stable collectedness of heart, his samādhi. So it's no longer the result of his seclusion, because seclusion has wonderful qualities that it brings to us. But the second jhana is now you're tasting samādhi, the collected stability of mind, becoming more and more settled in that sense of safety. And then the joy still continues vibrating, but you have other things happening. Furthermore, the bhikkhu goes deeper in his meditation, and by not holding on to anything, including the experience of spiritual joy, he witnesses it beginning to vanish and cease. So the joy goes away, fades. Thus he abides in a state of equanimity while being mindful and fully aware, still feeling a subtle ecstasy throughout, as he enters upon and abides in the third jhana, for which reason noble ones declare, it is such a one indeed who is serenely mindful, abiding in happiness with an ever-present sense of equanimity. By going further, the bhikkhu gives up both pleasure and pain, and having already gone beyond joy and anguish, he remains in the continuous state of purifying mindfulness with an ever-present sense of equanimity, as he enters upon and abides in the fourth jhana, while experiencing neither pleasure nor pain, having now gone beyond them both. So now you've transcended the normal experiences that you might get in the body. So you've disassociated from the body, unless something comes and touches it, that is. 15, section 15, ending to the cycle, complete cessation. Thus, on seeing a visible form with the eyes, if it happens to be a delightful and pleasurable sight, he does not go on lusting after it. And if it, so this is again with the eyes, so I'm going to read the other section so we can save some time. On hearing a sound with the ears, on smelling a fragrance or an odor with the nose, on tasting a flavor with the tongue, on touching a tactile object with the body, and on cognizing a mind object with the mind. If it happens to be a delightful and pleasurable mind object or thought, he does not go on lusting after it. And if it happens to be a disagreeable or unpleasant mind object or thought, that too he does not abhor or dislike either. So this is the opposite of opposite behavior towards what the six senses are picking up, which we saw earlier, because the person was becoming or leaning into those experiences, and that's why they were stuck in samsara. They were continuously being reborn. In this case, the Buddha is giving us the roadmap how to end suffering. That's called nirodha, cessation of suffering. In this manner, he lives his life with awareness and control, dwelling and grounded within the body, with an ever-present mindfulness firmly established in him, along with a heart that is in a boundlessly expansive state of openness and secure stability. What a wonderful state to be in, right? It sounds like it. Furthermore, he understands how the heart's release takes place and the way in which freedom is attained through wisdom, wherein those harmful and evil states get eliminated by ceasing without any remainder. Maintaining full awareness while staying unshakable, thus, he has already abandoned all manner of preferring and rejecting. Having given up liking and disliking altogether when confronted by the variety of feelings he experiences, be they pleasant, painful, or neutral. No longer favoring those that give him delight, as he does not lean into nor welcomes them, or tries to tenaciously grab onto them. All this keeps him safe from becoming animated, as he gives up his old tendency to look for ways to experience delightful experiences. Thus, the abandoning of that very quest for more enjoyable and delightful experiences leads him to completely give up the drive to want to grab and hold on, which then ceases. And when that tenacious drive to grab and hold on has been thus eliminated, then the desire to re-become also ceases entirely. And once that desire for re-becoming is finished, then birth too finishes and does not take place ever again. As a direct result of this, illness, aging, and death also cease and no longer occur for him. And through their cessation, the sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and utter anguish they would have certainly brought along with them are all completely destroyed and cease altogether. It is therefore in this manner that this whole mass of suffering is finished and comes to cease, no longer to occur ever again. So it's not by the favor of a god or a Buddha or some being that the suffering will finish. You are the author of that task. Nothing is by chance. Nothing. The Dhamma is all about showing us the conditions for things to happen or for them to cease from happening if you remove those conditions. 16. Conclusion. Therefore, bhikkhus, you must remember this discourse by its brief title, the freedom that is attained through the destruction of craving with its constant thirst for more. Yet, despite having instructed and taught it to you all, this bhikkhu Sati, the son of a fisherman, apparently he was still there, still continues to be very much caught up in the vast net of craving, all tangled and bound up so tightly within the shackles of craving. This is what the Blessed One said. Meanwhile, those bhikkhus, carefully listening to these instructions, were all utterly delighted in hearing these words spoken to them by the Blessed One himself. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Here ends the Mahā Taṇhāsaṅkhaya Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 38. A sutta that for years that intimidated me to try to translate it, and second to do this. So I'm glad for posterity this was done. And questions, comments, don't be shy. Perhaps you're being kind to my voice. Don't
Thank
worry.
you, Bhante.
Oh, yes. Go ahead.
Question.
Yes, please.
Some of these links in the dependent origination are easier to grasp intellectually. So things like upadana and bhava and jati, and contact and feeling, they're easier to understand. or grasp a little bit, but then other ones are just completely still very mystical. Like, how does sankhara is the cause for consciousness to manifest? That's still very mystical. I can't think of an example that where I could understand that.
Was that all?
Yeah, could you explain that link?
Yes, and that link, for that link, usually, because of it, and because of the possibility of questions like the one you just presented, many have completely avoided talking about it, avoided exploring the Paticcasamuppada proper, or looked at it in a very simplistic manner by saying, oh, it's all a matter of you need to cut the craving. Make sure you cut the cord of craving when it's feeling, so you don't allow it to become, craving and upadana. So that link, before it turns into craving, make sure you cut it. Okay, that's fine and dandy. But what about the previous ones? Like sankhara. What is the connection between sankhara and vijnana? And how does vijnana play into namarupa? You have heard me mention about, if you notice, by the way, I'm not addressing sankhara yet. I'm mentioning the ones previous to that. I mean, going this way. When you have vijnana, you have salayatana, you have the six sense spheres. In this case, most people do not understand that there is, they lean upon each other. Bhante Syariputta says, in the bundle of reeds, the two bundles of reed from the Samyutta Nikaya, which I've covered 4 years ago here. It's a wonderful sutta. And he says, if you remove one, the other falls. But they're both reeds. Why not a block of wood, one piece, one block of, maybe two columns, two beams leaning against each other? That could have worked. But no, not in this case, because the image is very powerful. Because a bundle of reeds on both ends means it's comprised of different pieces, specifically 6. So the Buddha was clarifying for us in the case of Venerable Sariputta to Venerable Mahā. He was describing that you have to dismantle these piece by piece, but if you remove one, the other falls. Whether it's the consciousness that you're removing, it falls. Whether it's the 6 senses that you're removing, consciousnesses don't work. It's like the situation where you have a mother and a father, sperm and egg, but you don't have the stream of consciousness impelling, coming in to the picture. It's an empty bullet, if you will. It's blank. It doesn't go anywhere. It's empty. So the 6 sense spheres, which we call salayatana, leaning on one end, and consciousness on this end, are very much intertwined. You cannot have the 6 senses without vijnana, consciousness. It would be like a person who has supposedly a healthy eye that is not injured, but they're blind. Because the scientists for decades have known that it's not the eye that sees. The eye essentially just is the back. There's just the rods and cones. Yes, there's neuronal connections, but the main action of sight is taking place deeper into the brain. So the eye is there. So what do you need to make it alive? You need consciousness there. The Buddha did not teach anatomy, but he had to use the tools that were available, the words and the terminology that were available or familiar to people. And if they weren't, then the Buddha would have to invent new terms to make, the point. So these two have to be there. But you mentioned sankhara and conscious. By the way, so far so good? Okay. So consciousness, then nothing happens in a vacuum, right? It's all conditionality. So consciousness is itself relying on something that impels it, moves it, is holding the reins, if you will, on consciousness, and that is sankhara. Now, like yourself, I also thought of it as a mystical thing, and nobody provided any answer. No book I read on sankharas for close to 40 years. No explanation given by any teacher. Many, many monks were involved, many professors in Buddhism. So it was very frustrating to try to, but I knew it has to make sense. I was not understanding it because I was using terminology or chunks of data as definitions, as keys that simply did not work what the Buddha was trying to say. I was looking at the thing in a wrong way. It's almost like a being that lives on a one-dimensional plane or two-dimensional plane trying to understand a three-dimensional being. You know, you live on a piece of paper and that's all you see, length and width. You can't see above. And then somebody comes in from the third dimension and says, hey, guys, I'm over here. You don't have a concept to look up to make it, that would make it three-dimensional for you. But it requires a leap. So here is where we need to go to the most basic ways of understanding, experience. And this, for this to happen, we need to go deep into meditation. Not just that, but to take meditation in the form of mindfulness to be able to surgically cut through moment to moment and moment to moment with awareness of your living experience. And then see what is happening before this, see what is happening before that. And then you're going to see, most probably you will be able to see feeling, yes. But you're also going to, if you practice well enough, you will see the connection that is there between feeling and craving. Okay, next step would be to take a step further back. What's the connection between feeling and contact? Can I catch it right the moment of contact? With practice, you will. And slowly, you will, with perseverance, you will. So with sankhara, there's three kinds of sankhara. We have to understand that. And for this, I invite you to go and, yeah, we did cover that. But there's this wonderful sutta with Venerable Arahant Bhikkhuni Dhammadinna and the lay disciple Visakha. And there's this beautiful dialogue where she clearly designates what the sankharas are. Better than most places in the suttas, by the way. It always stands out. And it's the Chula Vedalla Sutta. So we've covered that, I think, 5 years ago in the suttas. 5? Something like that, 5 years ago. Maybe. So look at, I forgot which week it was. Anyhow, there's three kinds of, sankhara. One is the most basic, the bodily, which the Arahant Bhikkhuni says it's the breath, in and out breath, which is true. But you can bring it into other areas. It's not just with the breath, by the way. But she just used that. That's a common ground that everyone can relate to. But with practice in your meditation, you can also detect it every time you're going to move the body. Such as when you see something that makes you, compels you to reach over and pick it up. There's sankharas in action there. That's moving the body before the body moves. How does that work? Moving the body before the body works. What? The intention, before it becomes an intention, there's a trigger point. It's very subtle, but it's there. But if you are staying in avidya, if you are willfully ignoring, if you are letting the moments pass by without your awareness of them, full awareness of them, then you will be in avijja. Of course, you will not see sankhara. Hence, avijja paccaya sankhara. That's how sankharas appear. They're always happening. That is, in the mind of a person who's not fully aware. But we don't have just one type of sankhara, like the body related, that's the khaya sankhara. We also have vaci sankhara, which are the voice related, meaning communication, where you feel compelled to say something, either actual physically, using your lips and tongue and teeth and mouth to say. For a person who is very deluded, for a person who's very impulsive, you will see them blurt out words, say stuff, usually saying things that are out of place, gets them in trouble, hurts others, or some benign or even good things, but you feel like saying it, like a person who can't shut up. In therapy sessions, I would tell the therapists that I would train, please stop to consider what's going on in the room. There's a lot going on in the room between you and the client, with the patient. But you cannot hear, you cannot witness what's going on if you keep babbling. And that's very hard to keep. So that can become a very good practice to watch your thoughts. This is, doing retreats is really good also for this purpose, if you're being taught how to observe noble silence, which happens in the mind. Why though? We always say, oh, mental chatter, but what is mental chatter? No one asks that question, no one answers it. We're referring to vaci sankhara, what Bhante Jnanananda called it, subvocal speech. But it is speech nevertheless. It keeps the mind active. When the body moves, then it means there's already a lot of action going on already in the mind, in the speech form. So that's the vaci sankhara. Again, that takes place, it shows up conditioned by avijja, meaning, that's why I don't like the term ignorance, because ignorance is lifeless. It's like the color of the walls, meaning like it's there. It's like complete passivity. There's nothing there that can impose. No, avijja is very active. We breathe life into it. We sustain that ignorance. And that's why I call avijja willful ignoring. That's how sankharas dominate. That's how they manifest, whether through the body or in the form of vaci sankhara, speech in the mind, or through the lips. Now the third is mano sankhara, sometimes called citta sankhara. These are the thoughts and feelings, specifically thoughts. You can think of thoughts, but feelings also generate there, This is when you're practicing satipatthana, specifically cittanupassana, but even more importantly, dhammanupassana, the fourth of the satipatthana, when you're looking at the mind objects appearing. One of the best places to see them really come into and start a war with you is when you're doing walking meditation. And you're going to see what's happening. All these ideas, all these thoughts come in. They're very subtle. And that's why walking meditation is very difficult. But once you're able to, I guess, crack it or make it into a knack, you're able to go and train yourself and not give up. If and when you attain that level of tranquility, when you come and sit down, because that's what I encourage you to do, when you reach true tranquility through walking meditation, now you reach the prime state of perfect temperature, perfect state to go and sit down and really allow it to go deep. And you're going to see the tiniest little turbulences. What is that? What is that? You're going to be just looking at them, and then you're going to see, oh, these are the mental sankhara. But the moment you see it, it disappears. Why? None of them stick. The same with the vaci sankhara, same with the kaya sankhara. None of them will stay, even for a millisecond extra, if and when you have the presence of laser-like sati at them. What is that? That is the opposite of willful ignoring. You're not ignoring anything. Nothing escapes your sight. And this is another way of saying jnana dassana. Seeing with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge. That's how you know. We say pajanati. And that's where the arahant is. Because he doesn't or she doesn't allow any moment to slip by. That's why they're always observing. Remember last time I also said there's bad sankharas like akusala, but there's also kusala sankharas. Good deeds, this, that, and sometimes you want to say something. When you see somebody hurt, you're like going to jump in and try to say the right thing or reach over and help them, this and that. There's nothing bad about that. But our first objective has to be always, always, always observing what's going on. Good or bad sankhara doesn't matter for the meditator in this tradition. You need to be scrutinizing both. Simply because it's a good sankhara does not make it, get a pass from sati. Wisdom has to be there. So when there is wisdom, there's no avidya, therefore. Your light is turned on. There's no darkness. That's avidya. And by that, the presence of light, sankharas don't arise. And that's another way of understanding the cessation of sankhara, which occurs thanks to the cessation of avidya. Does this help? You have to give it, you have to sit with this, you have to practice this. But if there's any glitches in what I said in your mind, now is the time for you to bring it up so I can address those. But expect the understanding to happen for you as to what I said with you sitting with it, really sitting with it, allowing it to send down its roots of understanding. But if there are some shady areas or unclear, please go ahead and ask. Oh, I can't hear you. You're muted.
I said thank you. I think you spoke a lot to the connection between avidya and sankhara. Would you be able to talk through sankhara and consciousness?
Yes.
Thank you.
Of course, when one is missing, what happens to the other link? It's not there. So when it comes to the cessation aspect, even though Lord Buddha is so patient with us, he talks about the cessation of each of these links, one after the other, right? But we presume sometimes, maybe unconsciously, it's presumption, right? That all of these will have to occur with the removal of the base. Let's call avidya the base. Okay? So if you remove that, all you're concerned about is what happens to the offspring of that. The outcropping of avidya is what? Sankhara. So if avidya truly is not there, there is no question of vijnana then. Do you understand? Because the very thing that brought vijnana to light, made it happen, was the presence of sankhara. So when sankhara doesn't exist, there's no issue, there's no discussion about vijnana. It doesn't even show up. It's not on the map anymore. It's completely gone. It's like your mom and your dad, or my mom or my dad. somehow instead of them meeting each other, um, um, somebody else, meets my mother. So they marry, and the person who became my dad was no longer in the picture. That's going to have an impact on me. Maybe this person karmically would not be fit to be born by this new couple now. Who knows? I don't know. But essentially, something happened. There was a shift of reality. Something was completely different now. Because why? Because the ingredients have shifted. There is a cessation of a situation. Maybe my analogy doesn't fully grasp it, but basically, when there is a one, there's a two. And because there's a two, there's a three. Because there's a three, there's a four, etc. Right? But what if you eliminate one altogether? The wood chips or the logs that you were going to burn to get heat, that would turn into fire, and then produce heat, and then soot, and the pipes that would go up in the chimney, because of the ending of the fire, because you didn't put any fire, you didn't light the wood, the logs, so there's no fire. So can there be even discussion about a soot that never occurred? And then the dirt that the soot leaves on your white clothing, where did this come from? Well, there's none left. There's nothing there because it never occurred, because there's no soot. Why? Because there's no fire. Why? Because there's no fuel. Remember, the Buddha in the beginning of this sutta kept on talking about the ahara, the nourishing factors, the fuel. Avidya is the fuel for vijnana. Actually, for sankhara. Sankhara is the fuel for vijnana. So if there is no fuel for sankhara, then there is no sankhara. When there's no sankhara, then there's no vijnana. So are you getting it now? Because if you don't have the very primal, the very necessary foundational fuel for something, then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down the line numerically don't matter, because there's no one. You needed it to create it, the rest. But if the source is gone, avidya, think of it in this case as the source, it will cut out everything that follows. But immediate cessation will be observed in the absence of sankhara. And when that's the case, nothing will move. And arahants, when they went into arahatapala samādhi, the deep state, of absorption of an arahant, it's an attainment only available to arahants. Sometimes they're called anidassana vijnana, where they go beyond. So they sit, and there are times where the Buddha, Venerable Sariputta, and other arahants were in this arahatapala samādhi, and things happen around them, and they're not aware of it. But they're very they're percipient, but they're not aware of the noise. The brain is working. That's what I mean by they're percipient. They're not dead. They're in a very, very sublime state of, arahatapala samādhi. It's the fruition stage of arahatship, arahathood. So there's none of these things. There's definitely no avidya, and there's no avidya, none of the paticca samuppada work. That's why when an arahant dies, they do not come back in any form, any shape. They never are reborn. So the arahant never thinks about, well, what happens to vijnana, or what happens to upadana? Do I have upadana? No, because they don't have avidya to begin with. Make sense? Good question. Deep question. Yeah. And this is another reason why many people don't want to discuss Paticcasamuppada. They just go through the links, unfortunately. And many people just memorize the links and think that they got it. We have to exert some energy. If you want to build muscle, you need to exert energy. You need to do resistance training. You need to sweat. You need to exercise, which does not come easy for the body. You have to put the effort. Similarly, with understanding the deepest core truths of life, you're not going to find it in a book just like that. You need to process it. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? I know we went a little bit longer because I wanted us to complete today. It's wonderful stuff. I hope we did it justice without pushing too fast. Is there a question? But there is one. No. Okay. Let us transfer some merits. Akāsatha ca Mahā Taṇhāsaṅkhaya Sutta puññāntang anumoditva cirang rakhantu loka sāsanam. Akāsatha ca Mahā Taṇhāsaṅkhaya puññāntang anumoditva cirang rakhantu desanam. Akāsatha ca Mahā Taṇhāsaṅkhaya puññāntang anumoditva cirang rakhantu mam paranti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May the merits of today's session, of your attendance, of us sharing the beautiful discourse of Lord Buddha's, may all the enormous merits generated by this endeavor be shared with you, with your loved ones, with all beings, both human and non-human, with the devas, nagas, bhutas, brahmas, yakas, nagas, gandhabas, garudas, kumbhandas, all beings, all humans, all animals, but especially the ones who are the most receptive to receiving merits and in desperate need for them. And that is the peyatas, the hungry, miserable, ghost realm dwellers who are in so much pain. May they share incalculably the merits generated today. May all those who support us in this work, in this noble work, may they and all their loved ones, may you and all your loved ones be happy. May you be safe from danger. May you be prosperous. And may you continuously grow and develop in understanding and appreciating the Dhamma and completely transforming your life to one that is unimaginably beautiful, unexpectedly, even by you and by those around you, but beautiful and harmonious in every way. May you be strong and may you be loved and appreciated by all those around you. May all the enmities disappear from your life and you find peace, tranquility in your heart, and feel supported throughout yourself. Until next time, Sukhi Hotu.